Hello, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight for this virtual public hearing for the draft 2025 Fair Housing Plan. My name is Kim Zanti. I'm the Chief of the Community Planning and Grants Division of the Howard County Department of Housing and Community Development, or DHCD. Tonight, I serve in the role of Acting Vice Chair of the Baltimore Regional Fair Housing Group. As Chair Kimberly Rubens with the Baltimore City DHCD is out this week. I share opening remarks with two leaders of this work, Melissa Maddox Evans and Chuck Martin. So before we begin the hearing, some background on the Baltimore Regional Fair Housing Group. The group is comprised of 6 local governments in the Baltimore region that receive federal housing funds directly from HUD. As a result, we each have our own HUD planning and reporting requirements. Since 1996, our local governments have been voluntarily coordinating to implement Federal Fair Housing Act responsibilities. These plans help us carry out the intent of Congress when it passed the Fair Housing Act in 1968 and to develop and implement a regional strategy to meet these responsibilities. This legislation came after years of urban unrest related to residential segregation and exclusion from opportunity along racial lines. Congress recognized that the federal government, through its redlining during the Great Depression and continuing through the post-World War II suburban residential boom, had been an active proponent of that racial segregation and exclusion. Federally subsidized wealth-building new suburban homes were restricted to white families only, while redlined areas got federally supported urban renewal and public housing, but generally not wealth-building, federally supported mortgages. As a result, Congress sought to undo the harm that had been done in the decades before by requiring HUD and other federal agencies to administer, and I quote, programs and activities related to housing and urban development in a manner to affirmatively further the policies of the new law. HUD then required all of our local governments to certify that we are doing the same thing in order to receive federal housing funds. These efforts continue and are integral to our individual work to prepare HUD consolidated plans for our local fiscal years 2026 to 2030. The Fair Housing Plan serves as our check to see if we are truly taking actions to comply with our responsibilities under the Fair Housing Act as part of those plans. And now I would like to turn it over to Melissa Maddox Evans, Executive Director of the Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis. Melissa?
Thank you, Kim. And again, welcome this evening. We're glad that you can participate with us. I'm Melissa Maddox Evans, and I'm Executive Director, CEO for the Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis. And as Kim is now chairing the regional collaboration for local governments, currently I serve as chair for the regional collaboration of the region's public housing authorities. Our work has been included in these regional fair housing plans all the way back to the first one in 1996, and we meet monthly to carry out our part in these plans and to make sure that we're carrying out our duties as required under the Fair Housing Act. In 2005, a federal judge here in Baltimore ruled in the Thompson v. HUD case that HUD itself was liable under the Fair Housing Act for not taking a regional approach to desegregating its public housing after segregation became illegal. That ultimately resulted in a regional housing choice voucher mobility program for nearly 4,400 families run by the Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership. Our housing authorities now work closely with BRHP for short on our regional project-based voucher program and other efforts. And we're glad to contribute our vouchers individually to that effort. We're working very hard to bring economic opportunity to older public housing sites, which were usually built long ago in segregated, redlined areas of our jurisdictions. Through the Choice Neighborhoods program and other programs, cities like Baltimore and Annapolis are exploring ways to help our participants in our programs to access opportunity of our metropolitan area. And we're guided by the analysis that you are about to see. This fair housing plan gave us the chance to work with the private sector stakeholders too. And in light of that, I'd like to introduce to you Chuck Martin at M&T Bank, who co-chaired the stakeholder meetings and had a part in this process as well. Chuck?
Thank you. Yes, I'm Chuck Martin. I'm the Regional Community Reinvestment Officer at M&T Bank. And this is the second regional fair housing plan that I've been involved in. One of the reasons that private sector involvement is important here is that the private sector has been involved in quite a bit of fair housing enforcement in the particular region that we're talking about. First, I co-chaired 3 large shareholder meetings that all involved about 60 or more people, and then BMC staff, 3 topic-specific working groups, each co-chaired by both government and private sector leaders. Action steps suggested by each of these working groups are now in this draft plan. And now finally, this hearing in the public comment period that extends through February 28th, which is a couple weeks away, are a last chance for the public to weigh in before the plan is finalized and incorporated into local jurisdiction and housing authority plans moving forward. So thanks again for joining us tonight. And now I'll turn it over to Dan at BMC and our consultant Heidi at the Root Policy Research to present the analysis. Dan?
Great. Yeah, thanks, Chuck. And yeah, I want to introduce Heidi Agler, who heads up Root Policy Research, which has been our consultant for both our 2020 analysis and now this one too. And I want to encourage folks to keep introducing yourselves in the chat, especially there's a bunch of folks from the Fair Housing Group, both the jurisdictions and the housing authorities. So that's that way folks who aren't part of the Fair Housing Group can kind of know who we are, and then people just in general can kind of know who's at this hearing here. So I'm going to run through our kind of findings and analysis and some of the regional steps, action steps, and a lot of these numbers have been crunched by Heidi and her team. So I'll present them quickly, and then there may be more detail from Heidi, or she may be able to answer any questions that I can't answer. But one of the first things Heidi's team did for us was sort of just a demographic look at the region to see how things have changed. And these are some of the trends on this slide that I'll show through the maps that follow. This is concentration of African American population here in the Baltimore metropolitan area, which tends to be the most segregated. You notice the highest quintile is 90% or more. But you can also notice that some of those areas became less segregated between these 2 time periods as Black residents of our region moved further out into the suburban areas in general. And then the next slide is our region's Latino population. And you can see that group grew by 20% just between these, just in the 6-year period. And you can see kind of expanded into new parts of the region, including some of the parts that on the previous maps that had been more segregated. So they helped lessen the segregation of both mostly Black areas and mostly white areas. And although they also, you can see some increased concentration, particularly in Southeast Baltimore. The non-Hispanic white population, kind of the second most segregated racial group in our region, also became somewhat less segregated as people of color kind of gained access to the outer areas of the region that had been more concentrated by non-Hispanic white residents. And then finally, the Asian population of our region, which is also growing, became, you can see, a little more concentrated in Howard County. So those are just kind of the broad demographic trends. But something what we did was we updated the 2020 analysis that Heidi's team worked on, and that I think probably many of you participated in as well. We did it on a compressed timeline, but we followed that methodology, which itself kind of came from the 2015 rule, the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule. And that instructs us to look at racially concentrated areas of poverty, which you can see are overwhelmingly in Baltimore City. The last time we did this, they were all in Baltimore City, 29 census tracts. These are areas that are majority persons of color and more than 3%, more than 3 times the region's poverty rate. So 36.6% census tracts where at least 36.6% of the population is below the poverty level. Very poor census tracts. And you can see they exist largely in formerly redlined parts of Baltimore City. Newly in this current analysis, there is one census tract in the Middle River part of Baltimore County and one in Aberdeen in Harford County. These tracts are majority Black. They're 76% Black, whereas our region is only 31% Black. So disproportionately African American. And what our analysis and action steps say is that these areas need affordability preservation, but they also need investments such as Baltimore City, the city-state partnership to rehabilitate vacant homes in Baltimore City. Things like transportation infrastructure, like the Red Line, education investment, that kind of thing. Then we looked at 2 opportunity maps. This is the opportunity map that the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development uses for in their qualified allocation plan, which is newly open now, for distributing 9% low-income housing tax credits. You can see the indicators. This recognizes that where you grow up really has a lot of influence on what kind of life opportunity, economic, educational opportunity you have. So these are some indicators, and you can see the map. The blue areas are the higher opportunity, or what Maryland DHCD calls communities of opportunity. And so what we looked at the population overall in the region and found that while most people in the region live in communities of opportunity, there are disparities by race with non-Hispanic white and Asian residents disproportionately living in areas of opportunity, communities of opportunity, and Black residents disproportionately not living in communities of opportunity. It's sort of almost 90 years after that redlining map in 1937. At the same time, we took a look at federal law requires Maryland DHCD to report to HUD on its residents of its low-income housing tax credit properties, and you can see those are disproportionately African American, probably about 72% African American, as opposed to 31% African American for the population as a whole. And you can see that those units of housing are mostly not in communities of opportunity, but that when Maryland DHCD does fund affordable housing in communities of opportunity, African-American families do gain access to those communities. That's something we were really watching in the wake of the Voluntary Conciliation Agreement. And we're glad to see that when those units are constructed, it really does help African-American families live in communities of opportunity. We took a look for the first time. This this for this analysis, we received some data from Maryland DHCD that distinguished between 4% tax credits, which are not competitive, and 9% tax credits, which are. And we selected for this analysis on this slide, we selected out the new units because a lot of 4% tax credits are used to renovate existing housing. And obviously you can't decide where it's going to go if it already exists, but these are all new homes where someone is purchasing, property and building new homes on and can decide where they go. And you can see that fewer of a smaller percentage of the 4% tax credits go in communities of opportunity, only about 20%, whereas a third, still not a majority, going back to 2010, but a third of the 9% units. So 9% tax credits have some point incentives that can create more of an incentive to locate affordable housing in communities of opportunity and give people access to those areas. And this analysis shows that that's pretty important because it doesn't happen on its own with the 4% tax credits. We also, Melissa talked about our, whoops, I'm gonna mute folks. Looks like folks are muted now. I'm gonna mute everyone and you can unmute when it comes time to talk. You can unmute yourself. This is a map very much along the lines of the map that the Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership uses for that mobility program, that 4,400 family mobility program that Melissa mentioned. But they did this specifically for us and used Quintiles. So it's kind of an update of the map that we used in our 2020 analysis. There's a few more indicators on this one. There's a lot of school student proficiency in K-12 public schools. Also some indicators relative to rental and voucher use. And you can see it's very similar to the Maryland DHCD map. And then similar to that, we also looked at where people live, and it was very similar dynamic with shares of non-Hispanic white and Asian population increasing as you get into higher opportunity towards the #1 quintile, and shares of the Black population increasing as you get to the lower opportunity quintiles. And then we took a look at where publicly assisted housing, this is includes the low-income housing tax credit homes, but it's broader. It also includes HUD contracts and things like that. And whereas you can see on the bottom bar, the total homes in the region are kind of evenly distributed among the quintiles, that publicly assisted homes, particularly homes that are open to families, are disproportionately in the lower opportunity quintiles. And we have kind of historically split out elderly housing in this analysis because that is of the publicly assisted housing, that is has the most access to the higher opportunity quintiles. One thing that we're doing, as Melissa mentioned, to counter that is our regional project-based voucher program, where the housing authorities around the region have pitched in vouchers proportional to their size of their programs. And we've put out a bunch of RFPs, and we are helping to fund 13 developments around the region. We've committed 150 vouchers to those 13 developments overall, which include more than 1,000 units of affordable housing. So we've helped finance more than 1,000 units of affordable housing in communities of opportunity around the region. 49 of those units are occupied by low-income families right now, who are living in nice new apartments in safe communities where their kids can go to good schools. And the seed grant, though, that funded mobility counseling we've now spent all of that. And so we are really looking, one of the main action steps in this plan is to figure out how to fund that moving forward, because we currently don't have an RFP out. There are developers who are interested, but we need to solve that problem before we fund some more developments in communities of opportunity. Something we first really focused on in our last analysis is the racial home ownership gaps. And we're not unusual in the Baltimore region, but like the rest of the country, we have a wide gap, 30-point gap between non-Hispanic white residents who have a 76% home ownership and Black residents of the region at, 46%. And you can see that holds true. There's gaps in every local jurisdiction as well. And newly for this analysis, we've really been looking at this dynamic. Brian Green, who used to work for HUD, says in this report that the greatest obstacle, and this is consistent with what we've heard from homeownership counselors around the region when we talk to them following the 2020 analysis, that there just aren't homes to buy out there at a reasonable cost. And so that has led into some of our action steps as well. So I'm just going to kind of go through quickly. This is these slides, and I'm not going to go through all these slides with all the local action plans, but just to kind of go through the regional action steps. Were similar last time, continuing to support my work at BMC to help convene this group regionally. And we should all continue. We've taken a break on the housing committee to do this analysis, but we'll pick those meetings back up again. You see number 3 is to sustain that regional project-based voucher program, including identifying funding for mobility counseling. Number 4 relates to analysis of low-income housing tax credit homes, and we're going to keep the goal that we had in our 2020 analysis of making sure the Baltimore region receives about at least half of the low-income housing tax credits in the region, in the state, since we have about half the need in the whole state, and that of those that come to the Baltimore region, that more than half, 65%, are open to families and communities of opportunity. We're trying to rebalance those scales that have been unbalanced historically. Continue the regional preservation task force, and then the last 6, 7, and 8 here came from renters small group that Chuck showed or was talking about the slide of the working group that focused on fair housing barriers for renters. And so these say we're going to really take a look at health and safety inspections and try to have kind of at least sort of a floor across the region for health and safety inspections and information from those, what codes require so that tenants themselves can know what's not right and what they can protest, and to coordinate with Maryland's new Office of Tenant and Landlord Affairs. So those are 3 recommendations coming out of the renters work group. Then we have 3 related to homeownership disparities, including trying to make sure information is clear and available on the web, that we're working with the Maryland Task Force on Property Appraisal and Valuation Equity, just issued their recommendations. And then probably the big one, getting back to that supply of housing overall, is to convene the planning and housing directors every 6 months to really look at what can we do, what's feasible, what's the low hanging fruit to try to address the shortage of homes that makes it so tough for to narrow those homeownership gaps. In terms of working on barriers to address barriers to access to opportunity, number 12 are the steps mentioned on that racially concentrated areas of poverty slide. We also want to improve transit access overall to suburban job centers and opportunity areas. We want to make sure that those choice neighborhoods redevelopments that Melissa mentioned in Baltimore City and Annapolis are successful. So those need to get those low-income housing tax credits in that 35%. We need to make sure that 35% that don't go to current areas of opportunity are helping non-opportunity areas become areas of opportunity. We're going to help facilitate portability, look for mobility counseling funds, keep doing that analysis that you saw on that slide of DHCD's tax credit occupancy data, and continue. Maryland DHCD requires MOUs to help housing authorities refer voucher holders to tax credit properties. We're going to keep using those, which we've made some progress on. And then finally, the last group of regional action steps has to do with compliance, enforcement and compliance. And a lot of these come out of the enforcement working group. Actually, I should have mentioned these. These folks, or this step number 11 kind of comes out of the housing supply and working group. And then these come out of the enforcement working group. And they include lots of education for voucher holders at briefings, housing counseling, people who are getting housing counseling to become homeowners, property owners and managers. We started kind of trying to track the numbers, the enforcement numbers, both at MCCR and in our local agencies, and we want to continue doing that. Work with MCCR on the complaint process to see if that can be improved. Work to set fair testing goals regionally and move forward on that. A lot of jurisdictions are supporting the bills that are in the General Assembly right now to allow recording of fair housing tests. We're one of 11 states that doesn't allow that. And then something we've been doing after every state election, conduct a training for local government and housing authority officials on the duty to affirmatively further fair housing. So that's just sort of a whirlwind tour through our regional action steps. I'll just kind of flip through, starting with Annapolis. Each of the local governments also has their own action steps. And so we've got Annapolis, Anne Arundel County. I will drop the links to these slides in the chat, but because you can pull them up if you're not on my email list, and if you didn't see the email from a few hours ago, we've got slides for each local government here, just kind of summaries of the action steps, which you'll find more detail in the plan. Comments are due February 28th. You can email this housing@baltimometro.org email address with your comments, and then the local governments and housing authorities will finalize this plan in March. And we have a few printed copies right now of the draft. If you want a copy to look at on paper, to flip through it, please put your information in our chat. I think we have 7 left right now, and then we'll print a bunch of them at the end for the final ones, so you can have those to refer for the next 5 years. There's my information, and we'll stop presenting there, and I'm gonna put the slides in the chat here. If I can find it. There's the chat. There we go. Okay, does anyone else on our end have have anything to add? And if not, I guess we can open it up to anyone who would like to offer any comments. And you can raise your hand if you'd like to do that. Actually, you know what? I think I will keep this. Try to keep this slide on the screen so folks can kind of keep this information. All right, Barbara Samuels.
Thanks, Dan. If somebody else wants to chime in first, I'm happy to do that, but stepping into the silence, I'm happy to get us started. So I was on the supply committee work group, and I have read all 500 some pages, and will present some written comments. So just briefly then, as an overall matter, I think there is some really very rich and good analysis in this draft plan. In particular, I want to call out the analysis of barriers to supply, which focuses a lot on zoning barriers and other land use policy barriers, which of course nationally are getting a lot of attention and a lot of action. And in the prior administration at HUD, a grant program to try to eliminate some of these excessive regulatory barriers, which of course are also the kind of thing that Republicans like to do, is get rid of regulatory barriers. So I think that there's a lot of really good mapping and analysis on that. And, you know, I think we all realize that we're in the midst of a real housing shortage. The state says 96,000 units, about 36,000 in our region alone is the shortfall. And that's true around the country, and it's really changed the political dynamic and raised the salience of affordable housing and housing in the public, to the point where now the recent polls show large majorities of people, like in the 77% range, say that they are affected and that they don't believe that government is doing a very good job of addressing the shortage, and that especially included local government. So I think we're at a moment where we have a possibly generational opportunity for local governments, the mayors, the county executives, to really step up and lead here and to do bold things, because they're going to have can, if they do make meaningful proposals, they can have the support of large majorities of people and do not have to acquiesce, as has been the history, to NIMBYism and small groups of, people concerned just about their neighborhood who oppose expanding housing. Unfortunately, I don't believe that the action plans in this draft rise to the level of the analysis or the political moment. And I won't go through, all the local plans, but I will say that with the exception of Anne Arundel County, the jurisdiction's plans are really very cursory. They don't have a lot of metrics and milestones. They I see kind of lip service to some of the issues and impediments and recommendations that are raised in the analysis. But I think there's a big missed opportunity here to really be taking actions to deal with these regulatory barriers. And in our state, those regulatory barriers are multi-layered. So some of the first level is the state's smart growth system and the designation of priority funding areas, and in Baltimore County called the ERDL, beyond which it is very difficult to build anything. And except for McMansions on septic, of course. But those boundaries have not changed materially since they were first established. In the case of Baltimore County, it was established in the 1970s, and the population of that county has increased by 200,000 since that time. So that what has resulted, and I think this is reflected in the analysis and in the impediments that even the local governments recognize, is an artificial shortage of land on which to expand housing supply. Without expanding the area where we can build, we have very little chance of being able to make a dent in that 96,000 unit shortage, or to achieve the state's goals in doing so. And even within the priority funding areas and ERDL, where development is supposed to go, we undercut that with two mechanisms. One, which One is zoning, which is a problem all around the country. We are not alone in having so much of our land zoned for single family only housing, and everything else that would be denser and more affordable is illegal to build over virtually all of the areas that are within the areas designated for growth, which is very contradictory. And then the third barrier is that even within those areas that are designated for growth, we have the mechanism of the adequate public facilities ordinance, which we all sort of saw the fiasco in Baltimore County this past year around the county council changing the standards for school utilization and overcrowding to make it virtually impossible to build in the areas of Baltimore County that are within the Erdl. So that it's really, the result of that is very little production. And as the draft plan finds, we're not building housing at a rate that keeps track with household growth going forward, let alone the gaps that already exist. And so I really think that both the regional analysis, the regional action plans and the local action plans are quite remiss in not addressing that. I did want to address one thing on this funding issue that Dan highlighted, the lack of funding for mobility counseling for the project-based program. And I did want to just suggest that because most of those project-based vouchers are used in conjunction with low-income housing tax credits, we should be aware that the project development budgets for all those LIHTC projects do include a line item for marketing, and it would be perfectly reasonable and appropriate for some of that marketing funding to be used for the work that is done in terms of mobility counseling, recruiting, advertising to tenants on the waiting list for that program, screening and making referrals. Those are marketing expenses, and that could be one source that would be very appropriate to use. And the other area of funding that's identified is just in general shortfalls or shortages of funding for housing production, or at least for publicly assisted housing production. That's an area where we're going to have to be a lot more self-reliant over the next few years. I don't know what we're going to be able to count on, if anything, from the federal government. But Montgomery County is, doing something that I think we could and should emulate, and that is using bond funds to create a revolving short-term loan fund, for like construction loans and bridge loans, which gets paid back, and so really doesn't cost the county anything. But in those projects, those are mixed income projects where the market rate units cross-subsidize the affordable units. And in many of those projects, the Housing Authority in Montgomery County, HOC, takes either an ownership interest or becomes the sole owner of the project. And that is something that I think that we could and should do. And rather than each county trying to emulate that on its own, the region could get together and do a regional type of bond fund modeled after Montgomery County's program. I know we have a tendency to discount whatever Montgomery County does and say, well, that's Montgomery County, we're different. But I think we have, certainly Howard and Anne Arundel counties and parts of the other jurisdictions have similar market conditions to Montgomery County that would make something like that feasible. One other thing I would point out that I think is really not flagged by anybody in the action plans is the issue of exclusion of families with children from housing, which is, families with children are a protected group under the Fair Housing Act. Now, the data that is presented in the analysis does show how few units are being produced that are suitable for families. We mostly already have one bedroom units, studio units, and we're mostly producing just studio and one bedroom units. And so that is exacerbating the shortage of housing for one group in particular, which is families with children. Very short-sighted of us, I think, because obviously children are the future. People like my age are not the future. We're over. So we're really, it's a self-inflicted wound for us to not be focused on how we can increase the production of housing, specifically housing that is sized and designed to be suitable for families with kids. So, you know, I'll have more to say in my written comments, but, you know, I will leave it at that and hope that some other folks can chime in.
All right, would anyone else like to raise your hand and chime in? Anyone? We can hang out for a little bit in case,
I could keep talking.
yeah, I'm sure you could.
No, but thank you for those comments. I think we should all take those to mind. This is an opportunity for us to make a change. Maybe we should. There you go.
Ms. Craig, would you like to?
Good evening. Argentine Craig from the Inclusionary Housing Coalition, which is a group of about 20 community groups band together to get the legislation passed in 2024. I also attended the Unity hearing last year that was held on Utah Street. And so this is my sitting in to a hearing. And Barbara Samuels covered very comprehensive comments and analysis and response. So that what I'm asking for is two things. I'm asking for two things. How is the building plan for housing connected with the education buildings in the area? Is there any coordination? Is there any alignment with where we're building units for families, hopefully for families, as Barbara underscored, in relation to the schools that the children would be attending in that area? That's one question. And the other one is there a waiting list at this point for the planned building? And if so, what's being done in response to people who have already noted that they are interested in housing for themselves or for their family? That's it, Dan. They're my two comments. And then later on, if you could put up the city slides, I would like to see the overall plan.
When you talk about the building plans, do you mean for housing overall or affordable housing in particular?
affordable housing particularly.
Yeah. And are you referring to Baltimore City specifically?
Baltimore City specifically, yes.
Yeah, I might need to, I don't know that I can speak since I'm the regional coordination guy. On Baltimore City's steps in particular. But these are, I think there are 3 slides for Baltimore. No, two slides for Baltimore City.
Yeah.
So here's the first group. And then I don't know if there's, if anyone is on from. Theo, I don't know if you'd like to speak to that at all from the city's perspective, or. Let's see, here's the second set of Baltimore City action steps.
Thank you, Dan. I am not sure. Understand the construction housing plan itself that Ms. Craig is referring to. We are in the midst, as we speak, of drafting a first time ever citywide housing plan, but we do not have anything specific when it comes to buildings that addresses the housing at a citywide level. We work with, a bunch of developers, as you probably know. We issue RFQs and RFPs to bring them in. We have a variety of programs and incentives to bring them into our neighborhood. The main thing that we're working on right now, of course, is our collaboration with the states in the implementation of what we consider to be the mayor's vacancy reduction plan, which ties into some sort of a broader plan to really reduce vacancies in conjunction with what the state is providing, both from a monetary standpoint, but also from a policy standpoint. So that's kind of the level we are at. So it's really more policy and then programs, nothing really new. And then, of course, once we complete our housing plan, we'll be in a better position of really addressing the shortage in terms of either a percentage, a housing types, a size of scale, but we're not quite there yet. So I'm not sure if I am answering your question, Ms. Craig.
Nice, Theo, nice try to address the challenge. It was a challenging question, I know, but
I can say the one place in particular where new development is being coordinated with schools is the Housing Authority's Baltimore City's Choice Neighborhoods plan in Perkins, Somerset, which is going to be a bunch of new multifamily housing, replacing the public housing on the Perkins site, and building a new City Springs Elementary Middle School. So that is one place where new development is being coordinated with a school. I guess the most place where new development in the region is impacted by schools is in the counties, actually, where there are a lot of areas, well, depending on the county, where development is restricted because the schools are full. And so that's something we're going to be looking at around the region.
So there is one example. There is one example of the coordination between these school building, education building.
That I know of, at least.
Okay, all right. And the other part of the other question was the waiting list. How's that being addressed, or is it in any way doing anything towards marketing towards that, or providing information for the people who are waiting. Mhm.
Well, we have information in this very large plan. There is information on the waiting lists, which are just huge, you know, especially for families, for general vouchers that are open to families. And we are drawing from those waiting lists for a regional project-based voucher program. I don't know that, I mean, the hardest thing about those waiting lists is there just aren't enough opportunities to be able to draw those families down real quickly.
But but is the planning, is the Housing Planning Commission, in the process of communicating with them? I mean, so do they know what's happening? Do they know what's happening and where they are in the lineup? How much communication, in other words, is going back and forth with those
Yeah,
who
that-
have indicated a need and a place in the whole comprehensive plan?
Yeah, that communication is up to the individual housing authorities because they each maintain their own waiting lists.
Mhm. Okay,
That would need to be answered by the individual housing authorities.
okay.
And maybe a
Thank you,
point
Dan.
of, Ms. Craig, maybe a point of clarification.
Hmm.
We at the DHCD are no longer part of the Housing Authority of Baltimore City. I'm assuming you probably know of this. So it used to be one agency
Mhm.
up until probably 6 years ago, about 6 years ago. So the Housing Authority of Baltimore City, HABC, and us, which is the HCD, are two separate, literally yet equal agencies. So dealing with the whole portfolio of managing public housing is not part of what we do.
Ah, very
Yeah.
good. Thank you, Theo. I did not know that.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you.
are
Mhm.
separate agencies.
Uh-huh, okay. All right.
I will say, to Ms. Craig's question, although I can't speak to Baltimore City particularly, if there is a redevelopment project, we're required as housing authorities to have a comprehensive outreach plan, wait list management plan, overall relocation plan. So as part of the entire redevelopment process. So you
Mhm.
can always ask your local housing authority, what is your wait list management plan? And they will literally have a plan to provide to you. It's considered public record.
Okay.
And so you can have a better understanding of what the strategy is.
Mhm.
And we're always open as a housing authority, public agency to comment
Mhm.
on it, or if there are things that need to be considered after you have reviewed the plan. But every housing authority has to have a wait list management plan as part of the redevelopment project. And it will outline the priorities and the preferences of that wait list, what happens with residents that are already on site and are allowed to return back. How do we bring in new residents? So on and so forth. So I just wanted you to know that. So you can, the housing authority would be glad to provide that to you.
Thank you, Melissa. Helpful. Thank you.
And maybe a last point on this, and maybe that's a question for you, Dan. Did we in the past ever invite HABC to these fair housing forums?
Sure, and I don't,
Or,
I guess I put you on the spot, so maybe I should, yeah, I mean, Corliss Alston is here from HABC. Corliss, I don't know if you're hearing Ms. Craig's question, but so yeah, we do have.
So can't get off of mute.
Hmm.
So good evening. I was having a little trouble getting off of mute. So HABC's waiting list is closed. However, we are pulling from our list and we are providing those individuals that we pull, we are sending them correspondence, and families that are currently on the list are, they are able to call in to see if they are still there. It's difficult to predict when we will be pulling, you know, when they will reach the top of the list, because we do go based on order, based on an order system.
Mhm. Okay,
I hope I answered your question.
you did.
Okay.
All right. I'm finished. I'll pass it on to other colleagues there. Dan, I'm finished. Thank
Yeah,
you.
Great. Thank you very much for coming and for sharing. Is there anyone before Barbara has something else to say? Is there anyone else who would like to talk at all? Or has any comments or questions?
Dan, you have a question in the chat.
Yeah, I see Mr. Snowden has got a question. Given the Trump administration's efforts to cut HUD staff and funding, can anyone explain what is being done at the state level to address this issue? And I don't know if we have anyone on from Maryland DHCD who can speak to that, although I know there are funding. I mean, we have our own budget crunch here at the state level, so and our legislators are crafting the budget as we speak, I think.
I will say that as a group of housing authorities and affordable housing leaders last week on our legislative call with Secretary Jake Day, we posed the same question. And Secretary Day stated that they're in the midst of plans to be able to evaluate what are short and long-term contingency plans, given the instability of federal funding. And he did not indicate what those plans are. We were left with the impression that they are in the works and that they are trying to develop a plan in the event that our funding is reduced or cut. As you all probably are aware, all housing authorities' funds were cut for a couple days, locked as a result of the January 27th OMB order, which was thereafter rescinded. So we are definitely pressing Secretary Day and the administration and actually our congressional leaders to make this a top priority, given the instability of the current administration and the determination to create a bit of upheaval. We do know that there are significant cuts in progress now at HUD with regards to staffing and significant cuts with regards to contractors, which will impact things like Inspire inspections, which we were informed yesterday. The contract is either subject to or about to be terminated. And so there are a lot of things going on a daily basis. So it's just very important, all of us individually as well as collectively continue to allow our voices to be heard in order to ensure that we can continue to protect the families that we serve.
And I think Melissa, you had mentioned to me earlier today that the rental housing works budget. So the governor has proposed a fairly robust rental housing works budget that is maybe cut in the General Assembly. So I don't know if I mean the state is in a bit of a different situation, but yeah, that's a good question for your state legislators too, because they're deciding what state resources will be available for housing right now.
Correct.
Anyone else but Barbara? And then we can go to Barbara if there's nobody else. All right, Barbara, do you have
Looks like Heidi's trying to get through.
oh, Heidi, were you trying to unmute? No, okay.
No, I had just mentioned a couple bonds. Just wanted people to, in the chat, people to be aware of Portland, Oregon has done a really successful regional bond, and so has Santa Clara County, California. That's raised a lot of money for housing. So just other examples.
Other regional, so Portland on the city level or on the metropolitan level?
The metropolitan level, actually.
Oh, okay.
Here, I'll put that back in.
And then you said Santa Clara as well?
Santa Clara counties, there's doubled their, it's called Measure A. And I'll send some, I'll put this in right now. Measure A doubled their production of permanent supportive housing. So these are really successful bond efforts that I would look to as examples.
Great. All right, Barbara, did you
Sure.
have something?
And thank you, Heidi. I didn't know about the Portland example. So just on a couple of things that just came up. One is on coordination, housing and schools. The Secretary Day, as well as studies that have been done by Anne Arundel County, Montgomery County Planning, and others on this issue of adequate public facilities ordinances, show that new housing does not cause school overcrowding. That empirically is a fact. And so based on that, I know that Montgomery County in 2020 repealed the standards in their adequate public facilities ordinance that had to do with school crowding, and acknowledged that actually it's the responsibility of the county and the school system to be coordinating their capital improvement budgets, and to be either or both building new school capacity where it's needed or redistricting schools, but that it is not empirically supported or rational to be, sorry, cutting off production of needed housing because new housing is not even the cause nor an effective solution to school crowding. So that is something I think that Anne Arundel is taking some steps toward, but I think Baltimore County really needs to repeal what they did last year, and Howard County's got some work to do as well on that. Then on the issue of redevelopment and fair housing. Sometimes we tend to conflate affordable housing with fair housing. All affordable housing is not fair housing. And we also conflate redevelopment with fair housing. And this pertains, I guess, particularly to the city, because there's nothing in the city's action plan that includes any steps towards increasing the supply of housing in opportunity areas of the city, of which there are opportunity areas in the city. And so the case law on this is really clear. It is not affirmatively furthering fair housing to be redeveloping housing or building housing, but only in the same areas where it has been historically segregated or which have become segregated. That redevelopment is only an action to affirmatively fair housing to the extent that it is part of a larger comprehensive balanced strategy that includes expanding housing in opportunity areas and breaking down the legacy of segregation, or as we call it often, the two Baltimores. So, that's one area where I think the city's action plan really needs a lot of work. It purports to support a balanced policy, but if you look at what's written in that plan, or if you look at what's written in the city's recent 10-year comprehensive plan that the state requires, there's nothing other than inclusionary housing that would lead to development of housing and opportunity areas. And, you know, we're moving pretty slowly on the inclusionary housing implementation. So there's also nothing in this plan that spells out how we're going to do that. Sorry. So I'll just leave it there.
Okay,
And do you have a comment on what Barbara said? There's nothing in the plan that includes inclusionary housing.
well, I am the regional guy, so that would need to be someone from the city to respond
Yeah,
to.
to clarify, it's in there, but it's just one sentence saying the
One
city will
sentence.
implement,
Mhm.
period.
Yeah.
I think we do appreciate both Barbara, Ms. Samuels, and Ms. Craig's comments. We'll try to fit that into the section about what we are doing in the fair housing realm. Just want to make sure that everybody still does understand that we are working, and this is not a regional approach, but we're working on our own housing plan. And I think out of that plan, some more specific measures and policies and things would be highlighted in order for us to really be a little bit more intentional with both, exactly where, but I also said that earlier with what. So there is a need to define what the needs are, to define what the shortage is, and what, exactly it is that the plan is going to address. So that is in the works. What Dan has showed us on those slides, I think, yes, I'll take it that it's a little bit generic when it comes to the city's position on those issues, but it's kind of where we are with what we are hearing now. Hopefully we'll find a way to beef it up a little bit more. It's a challenge, but yes, points are well taken.
And is there a
That's why we're-
timeline attached to that, Theo?
I'm sorry.
Is there a timeline attached to when?
You mean on the housing plan?
Mm-hmm.
There will
For the
be.
city.
Yes, no, there will be. I think we are not far from, we are in the midst of actually reviewing the first draft of the plan. So there is a timeline. I just need to get back to my notes. It's probably before the summer. It has to be released this year, 2025. But I have the information. I will provide it and share with the group.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Sure.
I think you're filling in for Kimberly, who's out this week, right? So has been more the
The key point, absolutely.
Yeah, but so that's another plan that the city is working on, and which I think will be there were I know there were town halls on it earlier, and I imagine there'll be kind
There'll
of
be more.
a draft out for comment like this one is. So, and I mean, Ms. Craig, your comments, this is exactly why we're doing this hearing, is to get comments like this, because our plan is in draft form and can still be changed. And so everyone's comments are very helpful as we nail down what we're gonna do, both. And then this is, the local governments are cooperating voluntarily. Lots of local governments don't do this. And so a lot, as you're seeing, a lot of, but the locals are where the money is, and where the, and where, so a lot of what is going to happen coming out of this is going to be at the local level. And then where we can come together regionally, like with the regional project-based voucher program, or Barbara's idea of possibly a loan pool. I mean, we kind of evaluate those opportunities as they come around and see what we can do. But these are great thoughts as we are, and we're recording them, so we will be looking at all of them. And Derek McCorvey says, what's the best way to stay informed about DHCD's progress on Baltimore's housing plan? I guess, I assume you're talking about the city's plan.
I think it's online.
Yeah, I know I've seen something. Let's see if I can find it quickly. It's on Town Hall. Well, we can, we've got everyone's information, so we can get that information out to folks. I think there's a way, I think if you go to the city's DHCD site, there's a way to sign up for updates, I believe.
Right, I'll keep looking around on HCD's site if there's some kind of direct way.
Mhm. Anyone else? Before we wrap
Is
up?
there another hearings planned in the future? Or is this the last hearing that'll be held?
Yeah, this is the only hearing we have scheduled. But as I mentioned, I can pop this last slide up again. We are accepting comments through the 28th,
February 28th.
February 28th. So this isn't
Mhm.
your last chance to have input. So there's another, I guess that's the end of next week. So not this Friday, but the following Friday.
Mhm.
If you can share any other thoughts that you might have before next Friday, then we'll respond to those comments and let you know how the plan, how it comes out in final form.
Mhm. Thank you.
I have a quick question.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, I had actually went to the Baltimore County Council meeting online. So I missed the beginning part. Will this recording be sent out before the 28th? Because I don't want to re-say something that's already been said.
We can make it available, I think. Yeah, why don't I
Hi,
send you?
Dan. This is Andrea Jackson. It'll be available on BMC's website. We typically post it on our website, but we can send notification when it gets posted. It'll probably be posted by the end of this week.
Okay.
Sharonda, this is Argentine.
Yes.
Had you come in earlier, what would you have said, or what would you have questioned? What would be your questions?
Oh, I just want to say the whole Baltimore County is screwed up. Okay, we have a system where the councilmen just don't have no basis for any decisions that are made other than something that I just know somebody. They don't talk, they don't listen to their planning committee. I mean, it's just chaos. And there is they just do whatever. I don't really have any questions. I just have a lot of comments because that's why I go to the council meetings.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Would you like to share some of those comments?
I mean, that's mainly my comments. I think that, the state has taken on some of the reining them in. But what needs to happen is as a collective, since they are having a lot of elections in 2 years, I think there has to be a emphasis that doesn't make any sense. I literally listened to like the Turner Station neighborhood, and you know, they have like a 18% vacancy rate because they've had a lot of flooding and things like that. But there is no, I mean, if you don't have the money, you don't have the connections, your communities don't get taken care of. Like a lot of those homes in like Turner Station could be redone if we put the investment into it, you know, and then there'll be more people that'll have places to live. That's why all the rates are skyrocketing. I think Baltimore County is doing the best that they can, based upon the council they have. I think it's really sad the way they do business, and there's not really a long-term solution other than, you know, let's just get sued. Because just recently there was a woman that wanted to build housing in Middle River, and it was just arbitrarily just like, okay, somebody doesn't like it, so let me just change the zoning, and that just has to stop. So. I'm sorry to tell the truth. I was trying to be nice.
No. We want the truth. I mean, this is a time for truth saying and truth behaving. No, that is really important. Too many lies have been told and are still being told in our society on all levels, city, state, national. Yeah, I'm for truth.
Well, I honestly, if someone is in Baltimore County, I do encourage people to go to the budget hearings that are as of right now, like there's one every week. So it's very important just to, you know, talk about housing and keep saying it, because they don't really listen unless you say it. And most people don't go to the meetings. So.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks everyone for attending and participating, and please feel free to I will put that comment email address in the chat. I think I got it right. Yeah, there we go. There's the email address to send any additional comments that you have before, not this Friday, but next Friday, February 28th. And then in March, we're going to be, as Kim said, you know, the local governments are pulling together their 5-year plans for using HUD funds right now. And so we want to finalize this report so they can use this this plan as they put together their 5-year consolidated plans. And the housing authorities with their 5-year PHA plans. So, all right, well, thanks everyone from the Fair Housing Group who came. We had a good representation. Thanks, Heidi, for joining us as well, and for all the work you did for this document, and are still going to do as we finalize it. And everyone for coming and being so thoughtful and offering your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Have a good night.
Appreciate
Good
your
night.
work.